What's up gamers, Dreamcastguy here, talking today about the PlayStation 5, because despite the fact that this console isn't officially revealed yet, there are already some really juicy rumors beginning to circulate as to what it'll do, what it'll play, and how much power it'll actually have. But there are some things about this that do have me a little bit worried, and today I want to actually talk about my one giant fear when it comes to the PlayStation 5. To get to this though, we first need to try and explore what's currently out, the current console generation, starting of course with the PlayStation 4. This thing is selling literal record-breaking numbers. This is actually about to break 100 units sold, which is just such gangbusters figures that it's hard to even comprehend it. But I think that a big part of this is the games themselves. Sony has been trying a very different strategy this console generation, which in my opinion has been a big key to their success. They're focusing on single-player experiences. Things like infamous Second Son, or things like the Ratchet & Clank remake, and obviously the newer games like Spider-Man and God of War. Each of these is a very, very phenomenal little story, and it's a journey that is made for you to go on. That way you get to make your own tale within this world. Now beyond this, I think that there's something very, very special about it because each one of these games is incredibly polished. There is something very, very unique about Sony exclusives specifically, where they just happen to have graphics that almost seem impossible for this hardware, and I'm hoping that this trend continues into the next generation. I want to keep seeing Sony actually focus on the fact that single-player gamers exist. There are people out there who just want to go on their own cool little tale. They want to try and have a chance to have a story just laid out before them so that they can explore it. I see that this is definitely not the trend in general when it comes to the industry though. Everybody else seems obsessed with trying to release that giant billion-dollar battle royale. I mean, just look at something like, obviously we have Fortnite right here on the screen, and that's just not the type of stuff that I hope Sony ever chases. That though, that's not my fear. My biggest fear is the fact that I think that Sony needs to find a way to speed up its development. Now, I know that's a little bit of a controversial statement, but it all kind of boils down to the fact that Sony is really trying to space their stuff out. On average, we get 3 or 4 Sony games every year, or basically around there. It's a good average, but I wish that there was a way that they could find a way to slightly speed it up in some capacity. So you may not know this, but there are actually 13 separate studios that are currently owned directly by Sony. Now, obviously there's a lot of people who make exclusive games for Sony, but they're not actually owned by them. That's something else entirely, and obviously those people are doing their own thing. I'm talking specifically about the Sony games though, because if Sony owns a developer, they actually control every aspect of it. So there's this guy named Shawn Layden, and he is actually the dude whose job it is to oversee these 13 studios. If there is any project that's secretly in development, Shawn Layden is keeping a very close eye on it. Everything from a new Gran Turismo to obviously stuff like Death Stranding. But here's the thing, Shawn Layden recently released a statement that to me is a little bit worrying. Shawn Layden said that right now everybody is concerned with trying to make really big games, but some of them bomb and some of them succeed. So his strategy is coming into the PlayStation 5 generation to make less games. Yes, I'm being completely serious. Sony wants to try and tap the brakes a little bit and really start to space things out, maybe giving us 1 or 2 games every year. Now, both of these will probably be really astronomical, giant moving experiences, but I think that Sony needs to realize that what sells consoles and gets the most attention, what is the lightning rod in this industry, is console exclusives. I mean, let's face it, that's part of the reason I think the Nintendo Switch really took off is because of Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey, and unfortunately, that is 100% of the reason that the Xbox One just isn't selling, is that there's nothing on it that is really a giant exclusive in the typical sense. It doesn't have that great of a halo or anything like that, so for people to try and rush out and buy it. What my real concern here is that I worry that Sony is trying to rely a little bit too heavily on the third-party publishers. Let's face facts, there is a peculiar phenomena that's surrounding the PlayStation 4 right now, which is that third-party people are actually selling more consoles than Sony themselves in some cases. Like if you just look at raw data, whenever there's a giant third-party game about to come out, whether it be Call of Duty or something along the lines of Red Dead Redemption 2, when this was about to come out, everybody got extremely hyped, and those who did not already own a PlayStation 4 rushed out to buy one. It became this sort of phenomena as everybody tried to get in on the experience, and so it ended up selling hundreds of thousands of extra units in a day simply because people were obviously trying to pick it up at the same time. That's all well and good, and obviously it makes a bunch of money for Sony itself. But what I am thinking is that Sony exclusives do something a little bit different, which is that they sell long term. I mean, if you just look at the sales figures of something like Horizon Zero Dawn, so obviously this came out 2 years ago, but it is a very, very unique experience. It is an expansive open world game that features robot dinosaurs and really good crafting and a lot of stuff that really, really appealed to gamers because it wasn't doing what anybody else was. It wanted to be unique, it strived to be different, and thankfully it got noticed. Well, today they actually announced that this game has sold 10 million units, which is a very clear sign that Sony exclusives sell long term. They're not just flash-in-the-pan successes. Sony games, since they are giant grand single-player games, they just stay there. They stay in the appeal. People keep picking them up months or even years later because there's something that you need to see and play to believe. I mean, look at something like Bloodborne. Bloodborne just keeps freaking selling because it is quite possibly one of the greatest action RPGs that will ever be crafted. People want in on it. And I think that Sony needs to realize that they need to be the person at the steering wheel. Their exclusives get the most attention and they make the money the most long term. I am just a little bit fearful of the fact that if Sony starts to try and just tap the brakes and slow down production and instead just make 1, 2, or maybe 3 big games every year, that is going to be too little. I think that they need to try and find a way to stagger production schedules. Maybe give us 1 big game, 1 small game. So a smaller game that's about to come out this year that I think is a very, very interesting little experiment is Dreams. Now, so far we're not exactly certain what this is, but Dreams seems to be a toolkit, something that allows you to create your own complete games within it, which kind of opens up the imagination of what all people will build. Already there are some leaks that make it look like you'll be able to make something like Dead Space within it, or Silent Hill, or maybe even an action RPG. Maybe you could make freaking Dark Souls 4 inside of this game. Now that's all well and good obviously, but I think the key aspect here that's really, really crucial is the fact that it is a smaller project. It is something that's meant to sit between the really major stuff. Dreams is not something that's going to take any sales away from Death Stranding. There's a term that I like, which is that there is only so much oxygen in the room, meaning that you need to try and stagger your appeal. You need to release your games a little bit far apart. But Sony's strategy seems to just try and really stagger things out way too much. I fear that if they only release 1 giant game a year, it won't be enough to make them a giant bombshell company. Look, let's just face facts. If they randomly came out and announced that they were doing the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and that was the only game they were making this entire year, I would be disappointed, and I say that as the biggest Final Fantasy fan on the planet. Would that game be great? Yeah, but after that we would be stuck in a terrible lull where we're faced with just the pure fact of the fact that there is nothing else out there. Sony needs to realize that since they own 13 separate studios, they need to try and find a way to more perfectly sprinkle the ingredients into the tortilla. If you're not making a burrito of flavor that we can nibble on all day, people are going to lose interest. Now, I just want to say this because I think that hardcore gamers are of course going to buy the PlayStation 5. It is going to be a huge day one seller. I think that, honestly, I'm just making this prediction now, the PlayStation 5 is going to sell better at launch than the PlayStation 4 did, which had a little bit of a slow start, if you remember. But I think that my fear is that casual gamers are not going to jump on this for 6 months or a year, and I think that that could be a very bad mixture. I think that something that really could help the PlayStation 5 is backwards compatibility. People are going to be willing to basically trade in their PlayStation 4 and jump to PS5 if it can still play PS4 games, but beyond this, we need some great launch games, we need some really big exclusives, and we need the Sony magic. That is the ingredients that will keep this delicious burrito fresh. Give us that Sony taco, baby. Please, please, please. We want it all. We want it now. Do what you can to keep us as happy as you can, as long as you can. But this is just my thoughts. Are you worried that Sony is going to be releasing too few games, or do you think that this idea of less games that happen to be bigger and better, a formula that could lead to giant success? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. You probably see a little bit of this shirt. Let me actually stand up. I love this shirt. Look, it's a corgi butt. It says "so lazy," and it's a corgi butt. It's just a corgi butt, because that's all you need is a corgi butt. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.